Disrespect Podcast.
In our new podcast.
And we have a new podcast.
Very first podcast.
In this video, I'll try to break down my thoughts on why podcasts are becoming so popular. Hey guys, Nikhil here. So we run a lot of YouTube channels for ourselves, for our customers. We run a lot of podcasts. I'll link our website in the description. And we've seen one common trend amongst all of them is that as a format, a simple explainer video like this may or may not get a lot of views. But a podcast typically, even when it is shot in a little bit okay manner, ends up gaining a lot of views for whatever reason. And why is that? But forget about a smaller channel. Even when you look at large channels, a lot of podcasts have started getting huge amount of views, have started creating a lot of cultural importance and significance. And as a format, it is something which, whenever someone says that this generation has a very short attention span, I love to show them podcasts. Because compared to even what they would watch in the last generation, TV news or TV serials, they would at max have a single topic which they're looking at for 40-45 minutes, with every 4 minutes having an interruption of a TV commercial. And in podcasts, you're talking about listening to a single conversation for hours and hours together. 2 hours, 3 hours. I have personally heard podcasts which are 3+ hours long. So why is this format working so well? The first point I would like to make is, as a content format, podcasts are very low effort for consumption. Again, I'm sure when I said low effort, you guys thought that I was talking about production. No. From a consumption perspective, it is a very low effort activity. What do I mean by this? If I'm watching a great Netflix movie, it is still a movie where I have to sit, plan, try and figure out a proper time slot, have my complete focused attention on that movie for 3 hours, have a setting where I'm not going to get distracted, and then I actually sit and enjoy the movie, maybe with some popcorn or whatever. There is a level of effort involved on my side. But a lot of times people don't want such an effort. What I mean by that is, podcasts get listened to when someone is just going on a drive. They end up being some kind of a background music when someone is working. I do that personally. I play podcasts and I keep working on whatever proposals or documents or whatever it is. And because it is a low effort activity in terms of consumption, it is easier to consume. It's easier to consume by a wider range of audience. Many people end up listening to podcasts when they're doing chores. And this one reason is, I believe, is one of the biggest reasons why they are becoming so famous. The second thing which I think is the case is the vibe of a podcast. So what do I mean by this? When I'm listening to a proper interview on a news channel, or when I'm listening to, again, a high production content piece, the vibe is I'm consuming something. This thing has been made for me and I'm consuming it. But in a podcast, when you tune into good podcasts, it almost feels like I'm hanging out with these two guests. Where else would you get a guest like, say, an Elon Musk sitting for 2-3 hours just having a conversation without any agenda? I'm sure he'll have some agenda behind, but when you're listening to it, doesn't feel like it. And this itself is one of the reasons why podcasts are becoming so famous. That authenticity, that vibe which you get, it almost feels like you're in a room with friends. That's something which all of us crave. I personally crave a lot. I don't get enough time with my friends. But the podcast genre has been able to create that vibe that I'm just hanging out with someone. This is another reason why people enjoy podcasts so much. And typically speaking, when you're looking at a high produced content where there's a proper script and there's an agenda and whatever it is, a lot of us feel that authenticity gets lost. And don't tell me you have not felt the same way. I'm sure when you hear a lot of people talk like in a structured manner, you'll feel like they're being inauthentic. When they come on a news channel, they'll be like, hey, you have to finish your talking points in a minute. That's not how human beings are. We want to have conversations with our peers. We want to have conversations with our people. We want to have conversations with our friends. And I'm using quotes when I say friends here, because that's the vibe which you get when you're listening to a good podcast. It almost feels like you're a third participant in that discussion, although you're not saying anything. And that feeling is something which is, you'll have to experience it if you've not sat down and just heard a chill podcast, something not very on a not very serious topic, You'll get what I'm trying to say. But this is the second reason why, the vibe which the content format of podcast has created. The third reason is more along the lines of content and context. So what do I mean by this? Even when I go into some technical deeper topics, when someone is discussing geopolitical affairs, or someone is discussing a deep technology problem, or talking about a brand story, right? Going from 0 to 100 or 1,000, whatever it is. A lot of times when you give them a very small 30-second, 1-minute structured way of trying to talk about that topic, you end up missing out on a lot of context and you just hear 1 or 2 lines about it. But in a podcast, because there is no upper limit on duration as such, the person is able to give complete context of what he or she is trying to say. And because you have complete context, you understand what went into making those decisions. You understand the story of that person a lot better. You appreciate it a lot more. And you have a lot more depth in the conversation, which gets lost in a lot of superficial traditional content formats. So from starting off with a lazy, the effort needed is low for a consumer, to talking about the vibe of a podcast, I'm talking about something much more deeper in our conscience, which is we are relating to a story a lot more because we have so much more context. And that is something which I do not think the traditional media will ever be able to replace or replicate or, fight off, because this format is now here to stay. What will happen is you'll have a lot more different types of podcasts coming up. You'll have a lot more different guests who are going to come and talk. And now you will see a lot of podcasts which are famous around political lines, but I'm willing to bet that you are going to see a lot more product podcasts, manufacturing podcasts, technology podcasts. You'll start seeing a lot more podcasts because the barrier to entry to create a podcast is really, really low. You can outsource to an agency like ours, or you can start a simple podcast with a camera and 2 mics. And that itself will be one of the reasons why this format is here to stay and only to grow. I don't see a way where this turns back or podcasts, start losing its sheen. What will happen is maybe some of the larger podcasts will not draw as many viewers as they did in the peak. But I am willing to bet that the podcast journey or the podcast industry in India is just getting started. And from that context, there's a huge opportunity out there. I keep encouraging all my friends around to launch a podcast, see how a simple podcast can help, not just themselves, help their business, and build a much better network for them. And I'd encourage you as well. What do you think about this? If you think there's some negative effects of podcasts, let me know in the comment section below. But hey, don't let anyone tell you that our generation has a low attention span. Show them podcasts which are 3-4 hours long, which all of us listen to. See you all in our next video.